welcome on stage, Elie.
South African Archbishop Desmond Tutu tells how when he was a child of 9, he was completely taken aback when he watched a white priest, Father Trevor Huddleston, tip his hat at Tutu's mother, who was a domestic worker in a hospital for the blind. Tutu could hardly wrap his mind around this gesture. In early 1940s South Africa, for a white man to show a black woman such a sign of respect was a thing rarely seen. In a single act, Father Huddleston acknowledged that this woman had value, that there was a loveliness in her that most white South Africans couldn't see. And it blew little Desmond away. In that moment, Father Huddleston became Tutu's hero, setting him on a path that would, in time, change South African history. Like Desmond Tutu, I also come from a notoriously conflicted part of the world known as Israel-Palestine. I was born and raised in Jerusalem to a family that is neither Jewish nor Palestinian. My father is American, my mother is Swiss, but my sisters and I were all raised in Israel, where we were immersed in both the Israeli and Arab communities of that land from our earliest days. When I was 5, my family moved into an Arab neighborhood where our Arab landlord and his extended family lived in the apartments above ours. Our landlord's daughter, Nadia, was my age, and we became fast friends and played together every day when we weren't at school. We didn't go to the same school. Nadia went to an Arab school in East Jerusalem, which is the Palestinian side of the city, while I went to an Israeli school. My sisters and I, from our earliest days, were always the non-Jews in our schools, but the only non-Jews in our schools, but it never really mattered to me because I was a very social child and made friends easily. So in addition to Nadia, I also had a lot of Israeli friends, not to mention all my friends from our international church community. As you can see, my upbringing was very rich in its exposure to otherness. I grew up as a minority within a plethora of majority cultures and religions. Diversity was the norm. I expected difference. I expected to be different and was therefore not afraid of those who were not like me, because that was most of the people around me. I happily played with everyone who came into the circumference of my sphere. Labels, they meant nothing to me. Christians, Muslims, Jews, Israelis, Palestinians, in my world, we were all one and the same. The only difference, perhaps, being the language that we spoke together, depending on who I was hanging out with. It was really that simple. When I look back on my childhood, it almost feels unbelievable to me in light of the divisions that are so rife in that part of the world, both then and now. But what seems impossible, I believe, was made possible because of the very strong values that undergirded my parents' choices and decisions. You see, my parents raised my sisters and me in a framework that valued and respected differences. But we were also taught to desire unity in that diversity and to work towards reconciliation in whatever context we found ourselves in. The way we were raised taught us to be bridges, to be translators, as it were, of the various cultures, communities, or narratives, the one to the other. I guess you could say we were accidental peacemakers, and it was the most natural thing in the world because of the way our lives wove in and out of these various communities without any regard for the invisible or visible walls that so often divide societies. Of course, there's a lot more nuance to the situation there, but as a child, I was unaware of these complexities. Instead, my experience of the issues at hand was through people, not politics. Relationships were the defining mark of my childhood. Now I'm going to ask you to skip ahead with me several decades to 2013, when my story unexpectedly intersected with the evolving story of a Palestinian school in East Jerusalem, a school that was trying against all odds to integrate peace and nonviolence into its ethos and culture. As part of this effort, I was given the task of writing a Peace Heroes curriculum for the school's elementary age students. There's something you have to understand about that part of the world in order to appreciate the magnitude of this idea. In Israel and Palestine, the heroic warrior is a very strong concept or image in the society, but for both communities, it is completely tied into militaristic achievements. I was being asked to write something that would reframe the student's sense of who is a hero, that would give them new models to aspire to, models that prioritize peace as a way of being over and above everything else. It's been said that if we don't teach our children peace, someone else will teach them violence. I was being asked to write something to find a way to teach peace, and was thrilled to be given the opportunity to write something that felt so desperately needed in that chronically conflicted part of the world. What I loved best about this project was the way that it approached peace through stories, through the life narratives of inspiring women and men from all over the world. For me, the idea hit the nail on the head. I knew from my own experience that narratives can impact kids in a big way. You see, as a child, I was addicted to stories. One of my favorite childhood memories is of my father reading to us before bed, book after book for years on end. I couldn't get enough. So when I grew too old to be read to, I carried on the tradition myself by reading as many stories as I could get my hands on. Stories are powerful. In fact, I would argue that stories are more powerful than many other media in engaging both our minds and our hearts to change how we think and feel. Stories, I believe, have the potential of making us more fully human because of the way they tap into our deepest emotions and enable us to feel empathy and compassion at that same deep level. This is the power of the imagination, that it can take us out of ourselves and put us in someone else's shoes, giving us a perspective that is hard to come by in any other way. Each of us has a story. Each of our lives is a story, and it's amazing to think that through the imagination we can, for a moment, live in one another's narrative. That I can see the world through your eyes, and you can see the world through mine. It's so much harder to judge, to hate, to alienate, to exclude, to blame, to ignore, to mistreat, when we enter into the story of a life. Imagination gives birth to compassion, and there are few forces in this world more effective than compassion in bringing clarity and propelling us to action. So yes, I love the idea of using stories to engage kids' imaginations and hopefully open them up to the world around them with a little more compassion. But I also love the idea of using real-life narratives of champions of peace, people we would call heroes, to bring this change about. Heroes are powerful figures, we all know this, and we just have to look at the children to see their impact on our lives. But with kids, it starts with superheroes, right? It's almost like a coming of age, out of toddlerhood and into childhood, when kids become obsessed with the world of superheroes. How many of us have seen little 4 or 5 or 6-year-olds running around in Superman or Batman outfits, or have had to make birthday cakes revolving around this theme? I remember when I was 6 or 7, I went to school dressed up as Wonder Woman for Purim, which is the Jewish equivalent of Halloween. And during break, we were all playing outside, and I was chasing the bad guys. And in mid-run, I tried to spin around to properly turn into Wonder Woman, the way the TV character did. But of course, running and spinning is not a brilliant combination. So my superhero moment of glory ended in a spectacular tumble and fall that more or less scraped the skin off one side of my body. You see, kids, they don't just look up to. They also pretend to be like their heroes, even at the risk of some pretty nasty injuries. So think about it. The potential impact of using stories to tap into children's obsession with superheroes as a way of introducing them to a new kind of hero, to real-life heroes, to people we want them to look up to and be like, people whose actions can inspire them to go and do likewise, to make a difference for good in the world around them. I started to write these stories down, stories that affirm in so many and diverse ways that all people have value, no matter who they are. That human dignity spans the spectrum of every category we would impose on the peoples of this earth. We told our students about Gandhi and about Mother Teresa and about Martin Luther King Jr. We told them about Rafar Khan and Lema Bowie and Malala Yousafzai. We opened up their world by introducing them not only to Muslim peacemakers, but also to peace heroes of Christian, Jewish, Buddhist, or Hindu faith. We told them about people fighting for social justice, but we also told them about people working to alleviate poverty or to better the environment. We told them about musicians and artists, healthcare workers, architects, people from all walks of life who have used their gifts and abilities to restore dignity to the broken world around them. And we told our students about Palestinian and Israeli peace heroes, challenging not only their conception of who is a hero, but also of who is an enemy and a friend. From the beginning, students loved learning about the peace heroes, and the peace history classes became a favorite among the teachers as well as students. And I honestly believe that the reason for this is that it's a class that revolves around stories. So, did it make a difference? Let me tell you a story to answer that question. This is Tamer's story. Tamer started learning about peace heroes when he was in the 3rd grade, and somewhere down the road he fell in love with a hero named Mama Maggie. Most of you will not have heard of her. She's a woman who has dedicated her life to working with and enhancing the lives of people living in Cairo's garbage slums. When we asked Tamer if he could do a short presentation on a group of women, on his favorite hero to a group of women, he chose to present on Mama Maggie. His presentation was thorough, it was heartfelt, and it was also funny because of the way he had the tendency to get some of the minor details of her life just a little bit mixed up. But the sheer joy of talking about his favorite hero was palpable. At his conclusion, Tamer told the woman that he had chosen to present on Mama Maggie because he loved the way she helps all people, no matter who they are. Christians, Muslims, Jews, everyone, he told us with great enthusiasm. Never mind that there are no Jews living in Cairo's garbage slums. That's beside the point. The point is that Tamer had understood Mama Maggie's heart, a heart that desires to help all people born into poverty, regardless of their religious, ethnic, or social identity. Tamer's interpretation of Mama Maggie's life was telling. Telling because of the way he took her values and superimposed them on his own reality, where division between Christians, Muslims, and Jews is rife, and the upholding of human dignity can be a monumental challenge. Tamer had begun to see his world through Mama Maggie's eyes. But to my mind, the most important aspect of Tamer's presentation is this, that through Mama Maggie, he had begun to internalize that he too could be a peace hero, just like her. And this is the most important part of our entire endeavor, that peace begins here, with me. Tamer's story is not an anomaly. We've seen this happen time and again, not only at the school in East Jerusalem, where over 1,000 students have been immersed in these narratives, but at various other schools across the globe as well that have also begun to teach peace through these same stories. In the past 2 years, we've had the amazing privilege of launching this project, which we named Paxology, in more schools in Palestine and Israel, as well as schools here in Kenya, including Woodland Star School, schools in South Africa, Burundi, and most recently in northern Iraq and Kurdistan. It seems that our need for heroes, those remarkable people who lead us and guide us along the way, is universal. Now, we tend to think of heroes as the big people, right? People who are distant from us, whose capabilities and superpowers we can't possess, but we readily admire. But I want to tell you a little secret. Most real-life heroes didn't start there, in that greatness. Most heroes started in the humble and lowly context of their lives. They grew in greatness only after they made the oftentimes very hard choices that eventually set them on the path to glory. We hear the stories of those who became great, but for every person we publicly celebrate, there are thousands more who remain anonymous, known only to those who are within their small sphere of influence, to those whose lives have been touched and changed by their courageous acts of goodness. I started by telling you about my unique childhood and how I grew up playing with kids from both sides of the divide. And I want to end by telling you the story that stands out to me the most when I remember Nadia. When I was 9, the first Intifada, or Palestinian uprising, broke out. And because of the violence, Nadia's school, which was on the Palestinian side of the city, was closed down for a significant amount of time. By then, we'd been good friends for several years, which is probably one of the reasons her father made the very unusual decision of sending her to school with me. I don't remember, well, actually, what's unusual about that, in case you missed that, is that he was sending his Arab daughter to an Israeli school. I don't remember how long she came to school with me, but her father must have deemed the venture a success, because after that she started accompanying me to all kinds of other places, including my ballet classes and my Hebrew summer camp. So there I was, bringing my Arab friend with me into all of my Israeli social circles. This would probably be a good moment to make a small speech about the importance of blurring lines, of being a bridge in a conflicted society, of taking people at face value. And while all these things are valid and true, it's not actually what stands out to me the most when I remember my friendship with Nadia. Instead, what I remember best is a small moment of seeming insignificance that utterly shook my world and solidified her in my mind as one of the kindest and most selfless people I had ever known. It happened on our first day of Hebrew camp. Nadia and I were sitting outside on a wooden bench under the very welcome shade of a huge pine tree, surrounded by dozens of other girls our age, all of them Israeli, all waiting to be sorted into the right groups. In the midst of the chaos, Nadia suddenly pulled out this great big bar of chocolate that her father had given her in the car just before he had dropped us off. Now, Nadia was always very shy in these public spaces, for reasons that, today, I can appreciate. There was so much at stake for her in these social settings, not only because of the language barrier, but also as the outsider, the one who clearly didn't belong. But on that day, in spite of her shyness, Nadia proceeded to break her chocolate into a dozen pieces and hand out the pieces to all the girls who had crowded around us at the first set of sugar. I watched in disbelief as Nadia willingly and happily handed out her precious chocolate, seemingly unperturbed by the fact that there was nothing left for her, not even a crumb. Maybe it was having sisters, I don't know, but when I was 9, my instinct, when it came to candy, was to hoard. There was no way I would have willingly and happily shared my chocolate with my sisters, let alone a group of strangers with whom I felt I didn't belong. Nadia's selflessness stunned me. It's a small moment in our shared history, but it's a moment Nadia became one of my heroes. How do I know this? Because of the way this moment has stayed with me decades later. Something shifted in me that day as I witnessed a beautiful expression of human kindness, an act of goodness that went down in my memory as something heroic. All of us need these kinds of heroes, people to lead us in the right direction, the direction of goodness. But you know what? All of us can also be those heroes. In the end, the message is simple, that peace begins here, with me, with you. It doesn't take much, just a commitment to goodness, to kindness, to human dignity, the willingness and effort to see not lines or categories, but faces, to encounter others near and far, to enter into their story, and let that encounter challenge us and change us. Never underestimate the power of a good deed, no matter how simple. After all, you never know when the next Desmond Tutu might be watching. Thank you.